Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the In Gaming podcast. This is your source for the week's latest gaming news every Tuesday at 7 p.m. GMT. Once again, my name is Hardiment, and I'm joined by my good friend and co host, DestinoWill.
Hello, Hardiment, and hello, listeners.
We've got a lot to talk about this week. So, just before we get started, if you enjoy the podcast, do be sure to like and subscribe and make sure to hit that notification bell so that you're notified every time a new episode goes live. With that being said, let's get into our first topic, which is this week's Nintendo Direct.
So, this week was the February edition of Nintendo Direct. Probably the most interesting part of it for me was the Mario Kart DLC, which comes many, many years after the game was actually released. So, there's going to be 48 tracks. I believe the majority of them, if not all of them, are remakes and remasters from previous games. And they're going to be released over the course of a year and a half. I think 8 tracks at a time. You can buy the pass for $25 or whatever your local currency is, or if you have the Nintendo Online Expansion Pass, I believe it's included, just like the Animal Crossing DLC was a few months back. They also announced new games from Fire Emblem. No Man's Sky is coming to Switch, which should be a lot of fun. I think that's going to be a great handheld game to have on the go. Mario Strikers, if you want to play a football game. Chrono Cross Remake, which to me is a bit of an odd choice. I feel like they'd be better off remaking Chrono Trigger since that was the one that was more renowned, but there you go. Switch Sports, Klonoa remasters, and a new mode for the Kirby game, which I believe something to do with a car. I've seen pictures of Kirby on a car.
Yes.
Do you have any more information about this? Because I don't actually know the context.
I believe it's called mouthful mode. And I'm not too sure beyond its name what that entails, but I think judging by the photo, which I've also seen, I think it maybe includes Kirby swallowing up a variety of different items, which sounds in equal parts mystifying and horrifying at the same time. So that's going to be interesting to see when that drops. It is, I think, interesting from the Nintendo Direct that a lot of it was remakes, remasters, including the 48 tracks from Mario Kart DLC.
Mhm.
It seems like, I mean, I don't know whether this is just a kind of a their current stance when it comes to kind of releasing new content is that they'd rather remake or remaster old games than old tracks in the case of Mario Kart 8 instead of making new titles. That could be maybe a symptom of the effect of the pandemic on kind of the development of new titles, and rather than maybe having to announce delays of kind of either new IPs or new sequels, they'd rather be able to keep some of the existing games going over a longer period of time. So I think I definitely think that was interesting. We didn't see a lot of kind of new new titles, and we haven't seen a lot, except obviously recently Pokemon Legends Arceus, which I've yet to try out, but I have heard is good, which is good news. So, what are you thinking? Are you going to pick up any of these games? Is anything kind of on your radar? Mario Kart, I guess, is a big one, but it's also very kind of
Yeah.
specific. It's got a specific, kind of time and place, which is kind of more
And
social.
admittedly, we do get in this home, we do get a lot of use out of Mario Kart. Like anytime people are over, we end up playing it for
Yeah.
a few hours most times. Like whatever the purpose of the get together is, we often end up just playing Mario Kart for a bit later on, like kind
Yeah.
of chill. So new tracks is definitely welcome. So I will be picking that up. The kind of interesting thing about the timing of this is that releasing quite soon is the Final Fantasy Chocobo Kart Racer.
Oh
I can't remember
yes,
the
of
exact name of it.
course. Yeah, yeah.
And additionally, Disney have also just announced a free-to-play car race, which I believe is going to be on all platforms.
Okay.
So it's
So
interesting that Nintendo have just announced this DLC for this really old game at the same time that these games have been announced.
yes, yeah, and it's I mean, it's also interesting, like you say, that this is coming years after its initial release. I mean, I still think to an extent the base game, in terms of you know, kind of visual from a visual standpoint and functionally it is still a really good game, and
Yeah,
so ultimately it's them building on the amount of content they've got within the title, adding these 48 remakes or remasters isn't inherently kind of a bad thing, because if people enjoy Mario Kart 8, then it's very likely they're going to enjoy these remasters and remakes. And if anything, it's just more and more content to consume on those, on that title. So it's definitely it makes sense. Instead of going and moving towards America Kart 9, which could very well be in the works, this extends the kind of lifespan of that game, while maybe, like I mentioned before, kind of the kind of working from home move, and the kind of the effects that the pandemic's had on the industry, maybe Mario Kart 9 has been pushed out further than originally anticipated,
yeah,
and this is a way to make sure that people have still got some more to play. The Klonoa remaster I am interested in, because I remember specifically, um, it must have been one of the demo discs from years past. I recall playing, a specific level from one of the Klonoa games kind of repeatedly, because I had maybe no actual games. I'd maybe sold them all. Was waiting for one to release, and instead, was just playing this demo disc over and over again. So that is something that I'll probably keep an eye out. That is obviously a really well-renowned platforming series, and a bit of nostalgia to boot. So, with that being said, I think that kind of wraps up everything on the Nintendo Direct. Will obviously, hopefully, be lots more to come in terms of new sequels and new IPs from Nintendo. But this just keeps obviously those games that we all know and love, kind of chugging along for the time being. So we'll move on to our next topic now. So next, we're going to talk about Lost Ark. This is the ARPG from South Korean developer Smilegate. It did originally release towards the latter end of 2019, just in Korea though. And since then, Amazon Games signed a publishing deal with Smilegate in order to release it over in the West. And it came out yesterday, so the 11th of February. Now, this game has been massively successful. We've seen a lot of early access previews. It has been talked about, I think, for a good few months now. I do recall seeing some videos kind of towards the end of last year, which I believe was kind of a public alpha or beta period, an early access period. So it has released fully as of yesterday, and this is obviously a free to play ARPG. Um, and it has seemingly overtaken almost every other game on the Steam, kind of the Steam platform. When looking at concurrent players, it has hit nearly a million over the past couple of days. So that includes the early access period and then obviously the full release yesterday. So it's clear that there's something about this game that is really drawing people in. It has been compared to kind of a Diablo-like MMO, or more like Torchlight. So a kind of top-level perspective ARPG, and is another MMO success after New World came out towards the end of last year. Now, there have been some issues with New World over the past couple of months in terms of the amount of bugs, having to disable trade, kind of new patches introducing new bugs. But when that game first initially launched, it was huge. It again, like with Lost Ark, had hit nearly a million, or even maybe tipped a million current players. So it was a really popular title, despite costing kind of £35 or whatever your local currency was. So Amazon Games have, in obviously in publishing Smilegate's property, have brought a lot of attention onto to this series, and it's kind of its popularity has exploded. And while New World's concurrent player count has been seemingly dropping since its launch, I think the initial critical reaction to Lost Ark has been a lot better. So whereas New World was seen as maybe a generally average, fairly derivative title that you could still get a lot of hours and a lot of enjoyment out of, but it had a pretty weak end game. It seems that people are really, really enjoying Lost Ark, which is, I think, surprising given the fact that this game has already been out for 2 years in Korea. And up until Amazon announced that they were going to publish it in the West, I hadn't personally seen too much kind of buzz about the title. It was only after it was announced it was be released in Europe and the US that the kind of hype began to start boiling up, and obviously that has led it to a really popular launch. Have you checked it out? Is there anything that you've seen that looks interesting? Are you going to check it out?
I would like to check it out. I don't know a great deal about it. It looks very visually impressive, although I believe it has actually got relatively low specs, so like a lot of people which probably helps the player count. Um, I'd give it a go. If it keeps going, I'm looking for games that I can put a lot of hours in on PC. So whilst I don't really have a decent PC setup at the moment, I am potentially considering a Steam Deck at some point.
Oh, okay, yes, which
And
which did yeah, the reviews for that and the embargo for that recently dropped.
but
So
I would need to know there's enough stuff that I can play on it that I could only play on that platform to
yeah,
make it worthwhile.
yeah, of course. Yeah, and that is something that obviously we are going to talk about in future when the Steam Deck does kind of officially release. Some reviews have already kind of come out and they've been really, really positive so far. So it's going to be interesting to see where that platform goes. But we'll talk about that in kind of its own
Yeah,
section
that
sometime
can make
down the line. Because just like
its own
you,
thing.
I think the Switch has its place in terms of portable gaming devices, but the the Steam Deck is very much aimed at those people who want to take PC games on the go. They want to have that fully fledged PC experience, but kind of wrapped up in a kind of smaller package with all the performance that you'd kind of expect out of PC titles, and also the flexibility in terms of the touch controls. So Lost Ark, I think, will definitely be a title that will lend itself really well to the Steam Deck. So I'm excited to see, kind of the uptake on the game once the Steam Deck does kind of finally release. Which it might be some time until the public can get their hands on it,
Yeah.
which gives everybody a lot of time to save up. Although it's competitively priced as well, which is good. So this is one that I'm going to keep my eyes on. I'm probably going to download it. Just it's a free to play, and I think maybe, like you said, that is that plus its kind of low spec barrier to entry has helped it explode in popularity. So it's definitely something that I'm interested in checking out over the next couple of weeks. So, with all that said, we are now going to move on to our next topic.
There's been some rumors lately of a Resident Evil 4 remake, which is considered one of if not the best Resident Evil games of the series. Resident Evil 4 recently had a release on VR as well, so it has remained in the public eye quite in recent times. It's rumored to be a remake of the original pitch, which had a much larger horror focus than the actual release did. Resident Evil 2 and 3 also had remakes over the last couple of years. 2 seemed to be pretty well critically acclaimed. I have played that myself, and I think that's fantastic. I've not played 3, and I believe it didn't get quite the same reception. I believe you've played 3. What was your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I played 3. I think a lot of the criticism was targeted towards its length, and also maybe towards maybe some critical opinion of the initial Resident Evil 3 release. So there are
Mm.
aspects of the game that maybe people felt weren't improved upon enough, from Resident Evil 3 initially. Whereas it felt like Resident Evil 2 was much more of a kind of overhaul remake of the initial game. It added in kind of elements that really strengthened that the original title, whilst giving you a reason to come to the remake and play it. Whereas it felt like Resident Evil 3 was more of a kind of verbatim remake of the original title. It definitely had a shorter development cycle than the Resident Evil 2 remake. It looked amazing, it sounded amazing, but I do think that there are kind of a lot of pitfalls when it came to kind of make it giving you enough of an incentive to play this. If you'd maybe already played the original, or even if you hadn't. So yeah, Resident Evil 2 definitely got the better critical reception.
That's good with what the rumors suggest, that it's going to be a slightly different take on at least the atmosphere or the vibe of the game. It's going to bring something new to it and potentially even improve on the original with 4 then.
Yeah, definitely. I think that they're trying to give people a reason to want a remake, because I think Resident Evil 4, like you said, is just released on Oculus Quest, Meta Quest, and it's still very much a game that there are kind of maybe janky elements to it. I think the control system is a bit antiquated at this point. The kind of stop and then move sort of gameplay mechanics. But I still think that you can happily play Resident Evil 4 and it still be a very kind of tight, um, enjoyable experience. So I think maybe there's a bit of a concern that it's kind of maybe a remake for remake's sake, because they've done 2 and 3. So if they're looking to pivot that towards the game's kind of original pitch, which is maybe more horror focused, before it might have been kind of maybe stripped back in terms of kind of for Western appeal, as it might be. So this will hopefully give people a reason to say, right, okay, a Resident Evil 4 remake, we're happy to have that if it's if it's distinguishable from kind of the original release, definitely.
Yeah, great. So I think that's it for Resident Evil 4 for now.
Yeah, we'll obviously let you know if and when any further rumors drop. There is talks about it being announced by Capcom relatively soon, so it'll be interesting to see when that might be. It'll also be interesting to see when that release window will be, because Resident Evil 3 came out kind of a few years ago now, a couple of years ago. So if they have a dedicated remake team, they've probably been working on that title for a while. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of release window we get. But yeah, I think that kind of wraps up Resident Evil 4. So we'll move on to our next topic, which is the Ubisoft Quartz controversy and how that seems to be deepening every single time we gather to talk about it. So we'll move on to that now. So Ubisoft Quartz is back in the news this week, and will probably be in the news every forthcoming week for the foreseeable future. The much embattled NFT scheme from Ubisoft continues to uh, make the video game community more irate with every single news article, every single quote from a management employee at Ubisoft. And this week we have been hearing from employees themselves about how they feel on the Ubisoft Quartz initiative, and how it is making them question the intentions of the management at Ubisoft, making them question how they feel as a developer within the Ubisoft umbrella, and also just generating a lot of a lot of discomfort between employees, and also a lot of disquiet between the fans of Ubisoft titles and just the video game community in general. One employee um, quoted to have said that it was a deeply embarrassing day to be an employee at Ubisoft, which is quite a powerful statement, especially given the fact that last year, just like with Activision Blizzard, there was a lot of news over aspects of harassment and kind of a troublesome workplace within the Ubisoft branch. Management at the time said that they had plans to sort it out, to make sure that the people responsible were weeded out and were removed from the company, and also that the atmosphere, the attitude of management, and the atmosphere of the company would change as a result of this. And it just seems to me as though this is more evidence of that disconnect between management and employees. Management seem to be pushing on this initiative, for what reason, it is yet to be seen, because there's maybe not a lot of current monetary value in pursuing this kind of NFT initiative, aside from a very few select people who might buy into it. I believe the numbers were somewhere around 15 NFTs had been purchased by players, which is obviously not the kind of numbers that I suppose management are looking for. And the problem is that instead of taking a step back and reassessing the situation, they're throwing themselves further and further down the rabbit hole of NFTs. They're further stoking the fires, of the video game community, and people who, previously have had a lot of respect for kind of Ubisoft titles. It seems that the management, for very little, is dragging the reputation of the whole brand under. And to kind of, I guess, evidence that, another employee had said, "Are we competing with EA for the most hated game studio by the public title? Because this is how you do it." So it seems that there is a rift that is opening between employees and management. Following on from obviously the harassment scandal, this just seems to dig kind of dig deeper the hole that the management at Ubisoft are kind of falling into. So, what are your thoughts? Did you have a look at this news? What are you thinking? We've obviously NFTs are a controversial topic at the moment. Not a lot of people see any kind of pros positives out of it. So, what have you been thinking?
So I mean, as you well know, I'm no fan of NFTs and the whole concept. I don't really see the point of it. Seems like a lot of it is just scams. But a lot of companies seem to have got into their heads, heads of companies, I suppose, seem to have got it in their heads that NFTs are the future. So they've decided that this is what they're going to push forward with. It's clearly been rejected on all fronts. And the guys whoever's at the top of Ubisoft clearly have very little regard for not only their own employees but also the consumers. And I think we may have mentioned previously the other week, when the public backlash towards the Quartz thing, they basically said the gamers, the players, they're basically stupid and they don't understand it.
Yeah, I think they just don't get
And
it. Yeah,
they just don't get it.
Yeah.
Which is, when you've already, as you've said, they've already been through a lot of issues over the last year or so, insulting the customers.
Is is
It's not.
it's
It's
not
not great.
not consumer friendly practice, and I think and it's a weird one because although Ubisoft, over the kind of past years, just talking in terms of their titles, Ubisoft have maybe started to Ubisoft titles have started to feel a bit stale, all working off the
Mhm.
same template, the same open world mechanic of lots of go and fetch, or the kind of icon covered map. Um, I think this is not what players were looking for out of Ubisoft. They at a time when the company has received backlash for its workplace practices, but also, the kind of the perhaps stale nature of some of their more recent titles. You don't want to launch an attack on the consumer because ultimately the consumer pays the bills. If these titles don't earn the amount that they want in terms of sales figures, then they're going to be shelved. They're not going to see the light of day. Sequels aren't going to see the light of day. Um, and the less money that Ubisoft makes, obviously they have investors, they have people who have stakes in the company. The less the company makes, the more those investors are going to see other opportunities. They're going to move to other companies who maybe aren't pursuing this, the kind of NFT blockchain future of video games. And like you say, I think a lot of it is that there's no discernible, um, positive aspect to NFTs or the blockchain for players. What are players getting out of a series of numbers scratched onto a helmet in a single player game? What is any player getting out of having a customizable helmet that wasn't already available by just allowing you to customize a helmet? These are not things that you're going to show off to your friends. Oh, look, I've got my name engraved on my helmet, because those gameplay mechanics have been around for years. Being able to name your ships, name your horses, name whatever it might be.
Yeah.
There's been no blockchain aspect to that. So why now is there this movement towards a wholesale monetization of customizability? Who does it serve except the people who make the money? And I
I
think,
think that this is it. I think what's happened is it's when NFTs first kind of got known, all the headlines were whatever, like JPEG of a monkey sells for $10 million or something ridiculous.
yeah,
And they're seeing that and they're saying, you mentioned investors, they can probably find some data, some NFTs that are sold and say, look, this is what we can project we can make from these NFTs, even though it's clearly not going to work, but as a way to maybe secure other funding and stuff
yeah,
by presenting the fact that they can make this money, which
and
in
you know,
realistically it's not going to happen.
microtransactions aren't a new thing to gaming. Cosmetic microtransactions aren't new. So obviously NFTs are centered around the blockchain. You having a string of numbers and letters, a key that essentially on refers to your ownership of that item. But what who is seeing that? Who is buying that and then being able to say, this is a good use of my money. If you're buying a cosmetic, and I think that it just doesn't bode well for the future of cosmetics within games, because I feel like there will just be this transition towards cosmetics in games being tied to a blockchain in order to maybe monetize them further, or raise the cost price of buying cosmetics within games, because now you're paying, you might pay, there are certain fees around the kind of energy usage of an NFT. There are fees around, having that key stored on a blockchain. So all I see is the prices of microtransactions for cosmetics rising, and there being no discernible gameplay, benefit to this, and who is going to buy these? How are they going to be priced? Investors might look at NFTs, or Ubisoft or whoever it might be might come to investors and say, "This is how much money NFTs make." But NFTs aren't bought by the mass public. They are bought by a very select few people who have a lot of money. And I suppose what Ubisoft are doing in this situation is saying, we would rather trade, we want to trade our reputation as a brand for a select few people who might pay $1 million for an NFT. Because if we get 100 of those, we've made $100 million. Whether the reputation of our brand is sunk deep into the ocean, and it's as the metaverse furthers, or the concept of the metaverse furthers, I think it's just going to get worse before it could possibly get better, because I can't envision what better is.
Well, we might not be heading that way after all, because I saw, it's not strictly gaming news, but I saw that Meta as a organization, their their stock shares had dropped like $200 billion or
200,
something.
210
Does
million.
210? Oh, the million. Sorry.
210 million.
Even
Yeah.
so, that's a
But
lot.
that
I,
is,
I mean, I know
yeah,
they have a lot, but
yeah, and that is the largest, kind of largest drop in share price, I think, of any business in US history. Almost overnight, $210 million was wiped off the value of Meta.
which
So
is the most that they've ever. In fact, I think it might even be the first time they've made a loss since Facebook launched.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it comes off the back, and I saw the news last week as well. It comes off the back of Facebook saying that they had lost monthly users for the
Hmm.
first time in the history of the company. They had less monthly users at the end than they had at the start, and that will have triggered it. That would have triggered a kind of wholesale sell of stocks. Sending
Yeah,
the value tumbling. So, if that's what can happen to a brand, as obviously embattled over the past couple of years with kind of whistleblowing in terms of bad practice. um, if something like that can wipe that much of a value off a brand like Facebook and Meta, what are we going to see in terms of kind of the share prices from game companies who don't make anywhere
yeah,
near that
much
amount?
smaller.
um I personally, it's intriguing to see where it's going. It can't be said that there's not any news coming from it. It's an intriguing topic, but I wonder if some game companies are just going to start to say, we're going to take a back seat until this is more of, called a more widely adopted concept. Maybe we don't need to be the trendsetter. We'll see how the trend goes, and then we'll decide whether or not to jump in. So I'm sure there's going to be lots coming out, especially off the back of that article. I wonder what Ubisoft's share price is at the moment. We have to see if maybe that's
Oh,
taken a downward turn.
the current trend is games company announces NFT, everyone hates it. Games company cancels NFTs.
Yes,
That's
I mean,
pretty
uh,
much the.
just on a bit of a tangent, it seems that everybody is up to it. The WWF, the World Wildlife Foundation, even decided to try and sell NFTs of endangered species of animal, which did not go down well, and very quickly they reversed course. So it seems that for the sake of kind of your brand reputation, it's not worth it at the moment. Anyway, there's such a new concept that it's not worth it. But it'll be interesting to see where this goes. It always is. So I'm sure we'll be back next week with another story about Ubisoft Quartz. indefinitely into the future.
I would just like to add before we move on about the employees themselves. Obviously, a lot of them aren't happy.
Yeah,
I think this is a good time for them to be speaking up, talking about this, because there's other companies who are currently expanding, Bungie, for example,
yeah,
who would may well be looking to poach from other organizations. And if they see there's much talented people, Ubisoft, who are clearly very vocally unhappy with their position, like that's
yeah,
yeah, that's something.
and
I hope
also,
if they're really unhappy, they get to go work somewhere that appreciates them.
and yeah,
Let them
they are happy.
work.
Yeah, and yeah, and I also think it's also a good. It's also good that employees are speaking out, because we often hear about the consumer side
Mm.
of it. So we hear the fact that the consumer doesn't want NFTs. It's, for one reason or another, they don't like this initiative. They don't want it in their games. But it's interesting to hear from internal employees who are obviously the people who some of these people have to make the NFTs, and it's interesting to hear, whether their hand has been kind of forced in terms of bringing this initiative to life. It would appear so. I suspect that the employees who are, part of this initiative, probably not particularly happy about it. So them speaking out is a way for us to
Yeah,
take a look behind the curtain and see how the people making these games and making these items
I
feel
think
about it.
I think it's also very important that the people within these organizations have their voices heard, because
Yeah.
until they do, to the consumer, a game developer or publisher is a single entity. Like, it's all just one. It's EA or it's Ubisoft.
Yeah, yeah.
But now we can see the different working parts. Like, we can see that the developers or the staff, that then not necessarily work in the same way or have the same thoughts or values as the CEOs and
Yeah,
the leaders.
absolutely. And I think that's the sort of thing that especially kind of in the wake of these workplace scandals, is something that management, I expect, will pick up on, and hopefully they will reverse ship at some point and say, look, you know, it the brand reputation has been tainted somewhat, but I still think that there's an opportunity for them to say, look, we misread this, we're sorry, um, we're gonna we're gonna put this to rest for a moment. So we'll see if that happens. But I, for one, am not holding my breath given what they've said so far. So we'll have to see. But yeah, with that being said, I think that wraps up the news for this week. So we're going to now move on to what we've been playing. So now we move on to what we've been playing over the past week, which in my case has been practically nothing. I've been incredibly busy over this past couple of weeks. So I haven't been able to play much new. I've maybe snuck in a bit of Destiny here or a bit of Valhalla there. But mostly this week, we're going to hand over to Will, because he's been playing a lot more than I have. So with that being said, Will, what have you been playing this week?
So I too have been playing Destiny 2. I didn't initially plan to. I was going to kind of just let it sit until the Witch Queen releases. But all the information Bungie have released over the last week, various videos and blogs about the Witch Queen, just got me really hyped and excited. So just kind of felt the itch to jump in and play a bunch. I realized that I hadn't yet done the Grasp of Avarice dungeon, which was part of the 30th anniversary pack, which dropped halfway through the current season of The Lost, which is a double-sized season due to the Witch Queen delays because of the pandemic and such things. So that was nicely timed. I put quite a lot of time into the activity that came along with it, which was the Dares of Eternity, which is a pretty hilarious game show style activity, hosted by Zer, who typically has been very quiet in the past, just turning up to sell some stuff occasionally. And Star Horse, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a celestial horse. Not much more context than that. It's just quite funny. It's good. You get a lot of cool loot. So yeah, this week I decided to finally jump into the dungeon. Quite challenging, not in the traditional way. The boss fights, there's only 2 in it, and as long as you get to grips with the mechanics and you've got a decent squad, like they're not too much trouble. It's all the other stuff in between which is challenging. So the first section is littered with booby traps. You'll just open a door and you'll get launched like halfway across the map, smacked into a wall, or you'll stand on a pressure plate and you get spiked, things like that. They're just all over the place.
Sounds like
And
Tomb
then
Raider.
there's and then there's bits where it'll trick you as well. So after the first bit, you've figured out some of the traps and what to look for, and you've gone to the kind of button you need to press to open the next section. Then the next section, you jump, you avoid a trap. There's the next button, but in this bit, the button sets off a trap. That bit takes ages, but it's quite interesting. It's quite funny as well.
Yeah, that sounds like you have to go through the process of dying before you realise how to avoid dying.
Yeah, what I really want to do is do it again and take you through it at some point, so I can just watch you walk into the traps and just laugh at it.
That is, what do they call that? They call that Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude, yeah. Enjoyment out of other people's misery.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's another bit of the dungeon which is actually really fun. There's a sparrow section. So the entire bit is one really long run. So you have to speed. It's basically a straight line. There's loads of obstacles to either jump over or go through, like tunnels. There's a bunch of fallen guys shooting at you as you're going through. And the objective every so often is a mine to defuse. So you know how you just stand in the area to defuse the mine?
Yeah.
They defuse much more quickly than the ones that you do in other strikes and things.
Okay.
You only have to take your sparrow in it for a couple of seconds before you move on to the next one. But the timing is so tight. If you bash into something or overshoot one of the things, have to go back to it, then they're all just going to explode and everyone dies. But it is a lot of fun, and the thing that makes it a lot of fun is the music. The music on the whole dungeon is really good, but on this bit, it's particularly good, and it sounds like something that would go in a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Sorry,
yeah,
it's just like got that really cool sort of adventurer, treasure hunter kind of piratey. You know, you just expect a big pirate ship to just come across the screen at any point. Like it's it's just really cool, and it's something very different. Bungie are very good with music in general, I think, the soundtracks, but this is just so different to anything I've seen in any of the other content I've played.
Yeah, I've always really enjoyed. I mean, not even just from Destiny, but also back in the day with was it Marty O'Donnell who did the Halo soundtrack as well? They've always had a really strong kind of touch for getting the soundtrack kind of spot on for whatever you're doing. And it sounds like it adds a lot of atmosphere to the dungeon that might not be there if you take away the music and the soundtrack. It loses a lot of that atmosphere. But it sounds like if you mention Pirates of the Caribbean, it sort of keeps you moving, keeps the momentum kind of up.
Yeah, it's quite fast.
Yeah,
it's I can't really describe it, but it's the one. If you can imagine the most well-known Pirates of the Caribbean theme music.
Yes, yeah,
that's probably played all over all the trailers and stuff. It's like that. That's
right, well that So, I'll have to. I haven't got the 30th anniversary pack. Yeah, I am going to buy it at some point, but I was going to get Witch Queen purchased before dropping another £100 on Destiny, which would probably probably total maybe £350 spent on Destiny over the years.
I do not wish to. I think I've spent slightly less than you in that I started a bit later, so I think I got
Forsaken.
first
Yeah.
year of Destiny 2, the first year of it discounted.
Yes. Yeah. Of
But
course.
after that, I've spent many
Many,
pounds on this
many
game.
pounds. But that's the thing. This is the. Oh, I guess that goes back to the NFTs discussion. That you're spending the money because you're getting something out of it, something enjoyable, and that's the sort of content that we want. So I'll definitely have to pick it up, and we'll have to go through the dungeon, and I will make sure to look online at which buttons will kill me, so that I don't embarrass myself in front of
No, it's
a,
not part
th-
of this one.
a third player. Yes, yeah. So I mean that's. Music is such an important aspect of games, so it's good that you brought that up, and I'll probably go and listen to the soundtrack regardless, just to check it out. Anything else you want to talk about on that topic?
Yeah, well, actually, since you don't have any games to talk about, is there any games that you've played where you have perhaps a favorite soundtrack in the past?
I mean, I hate to be cliche because I mean, if we talk about music soundtracks to video games, and I say I'm going to be cliche, what do you expect me to pick? Knowing what you know about me.
Um, Possibly Doom.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So yes, so I mean there are plenty of soundtracks over the years, um, but for me the standout one, just in terms of how it relates to the music that I listen to anyway on a
Yeah.
daily basis, Doom particularly resonated with me. I know it was obviously a popular soundtrack anyway. Just it was utterly uncompromising, brutal, just an absolutely an onslaught of kind of music when it came to that soundtrack, so perfectly timed with what you were doing in the game. But given that a lot of the music I listen to anyway is metal, very down tuned, kind of heavy, rhythmically heavy music. When I heard that soundtrack, it was just obviously an evolution of the original Doom, but I think it's probably been brought up time and time again how initially um, id Software didn't want a they didn't want guitars on the soundtrack. They just wanted synthesizers, maybe to kind of bring it into the kind of maybe the context of modern gaming soundtracks. But obviously, over time um, that became something that was slowly whittled down, by Mick Gordon. He slowly managed to twist the hand of management at id and convince them to put not just any guitars, but 8 or 9 string guitars, which are incredibly low, bass heavy, kind of sounding instruments. And so even if you maybe weren't into metal, but you play Doom, it has this almost primal kind of sound to it.
Mm.
That coupled with the kind of incredibly fuzzy, sort of filthy synthesizers that would run behind in the background, and now you've suddenly got a soundtrack for kind of all time. I think it will go down as one of the greatest soundtracks in gaming history. And it particularly kind of resonated with me, and it's why the Doom remake holds kind of a really important place in kind of my gaming history. What about you? Obviously, you've said you enjoy the Grass with Avarice one, but are there any particular games that kind of stand out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I won't go into it too much because we've talked about it before, but the recent Guardians of the Galaxy game has an excellent soundtrack,
Of
which
course.
is just an entire basically 80s metal album created just for the game.
Yes. Yeah.
It's brilliant. More in terms of more like traditional arrangements, pretty much anything from Final Fantasy or Metal Gear series. Like they're
Oh, of
just
course.
so good at making like epic kind of really epic soundtracks. A lot of the Final Fantasy ones have there'll be moments which are like emotional, a character will die or something, or something really bad happened, and they're really good at sort of capturing that mood with the music, things like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And just like with Guardians of the Galaxy, I thought Metal Gear Solid 5 had a really good combination
Yes, it had the licensed songs as well,
licensed
didn't it?
music as well as the original soundtrack. And of course, Metal Gear games, Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 had incredibly iconic introduction, intro songs. Metal Gear Solid 3 specifically had,
Yes,
incredibly James Bond-esque, um,
Snake Eater is
Snake
such a good
Eater,
song.
exactly. And then there's also obviously, talking about like we've said before, with the Halo soundtrack, things like that. They've always been excellent at, like you say, capturing that mood, that time, that place within a title, kind of in video game music. Final Fantasy as well. So,
Yeah. I would just probably give one more mention to actually another Kojima game, Death Stranding,
oh
because
yes, yeah,
so much of that game is obviously just spent walking and traversing terrain. So when the music kicks in, it always seems quite natural. Like it's when you're going into you're getting away from a town or whether going into your big trek, and then the
yeah,
music will kick in,
and it'll
and then
pull back the camera and
yeah,
kind of,
and it's
the
really
little
like
soundtrack in the bottom left as well.
even though the thing you're doing may still have some challenge to it, it kind of feels really relaxing and it's nice.
Yeah, yeah, and also Ludens by Bring Me the Horizon,
Yes,
which was a
was
huge track.
written
Um,
specifically for that song
yes, exactly. And also, I mean, the
game.
another game that bring up would be Gran Turismo. Over
Yes,
the years, Gran Turismo has had a phenomenal soundtrack. I recall back Gran Turismo 4 having um, some songs from Feeder on there. They had some songs from all sorts of bands. And more recently, GT7 again have a Bring Me the Horizon tune. They also have a song by London Grammar. They've got quite a few popular names on that soundtrack. Forza Horizon, I mean, you could go on and on. I think licensed music is. I could talk for hours about this. Licensed music can be almost as important as an original soundtrack. Think
yeah,
about
absolutely.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater.
I was just going to mention that
They
because
were,
I recently got the remaster of the one and two, which is a fantastic game and fantastic recreation. But a lot of the songs from the original soundtrack are no longer present, and that's quite disappointing to me because a lot of my early musical tastes, I feel, was shaped by those games when I played them
yeah,
in my
absolutely,
youth.
yeah,
And there's only a handful of the ones I really liked still present, and there's a lot more newer songs, but
yeah.
kind of things I'm not really feeling.
Millencolin, specifically Millencolin, I always remember. Um,
Yes.
and and not just Tony Hawk's. One thing that I think maybe some people forget is just how good the Criterion soundtracks for the Need for Speed games that they produced,
Hmm.
but also for Burnout. Burnout had, I mean, I try and recall, and Burnout Paradise had Rise Against, Kill Switch Engage. They had some really good tracks. Lower Than Atlantis. They were some big bands and a lot of post hardcore on there and metalcore as well. And those games were integral. So it's really it's kind of an important balance between licensed songs and then also kind of original soundtracks and the combination of those. So yeah, it's a great topic to talk about. So it's glad you brought it up. Starting to throw back a lot of nostalgic memories of those kind of early games and how important they were for developing just in general our music taste. Mine and yours. I know in terms of the kind of
Yeah,
metal
definitely.
aspect and punk aspect. Yeah. So with that being said, is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we can move on to what we're looking forward to.
Yeah. No worries. We'll move on to that now.
So, a game I'm really looking forward to is Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. Bit of a mouthful. This may be under quite a lot of people's radar, especially with so many big releases in February and March. People may remember it as the game that when it was announced created a bit of a meme because in the trailer the characters referenced the word chaos an incredible amount of times. But since then it's been fleshed out. There's been I think there's been a beta or demo or something. It's quite fun. So what they've explained it as being is it's kind of a prequel to the first Final Fantasy game, but not strictly in canon because that game does involve a bit of a plot to do with time loops. So it is connected, but it also kind of isn't. I believe the protagonist that you're going to play as is actually Garland, who is the evil sorcerer guy, like the main boss of the Final Fantasy game. So it's kind of an origin story of how he came to be the main bad guy in that story. I believe they've invented a first name for him as well, and it's something just really plain like Gary or something. I don't know. I don't think that's it. But it's something like that. But it's got so it differs from like typical Final Fantasy games in that it's very action focused. I think the combat is supposed to be quite similar to like the Soulsborne games, but does come with varying. I think it's got about 5 or 6 different difficulty settings, so you can have it as hard or as awful as you want it to be. The game is also going to include a multiplayer, so I think it's either 3 or 4 people can cooperatively go through the levels as a party, which I think is quite nice. It's especially in sort of like JRPGs when you always have a party. You always just typically just playing as the main guy and everyone's following you around. But it's quite a nice idea that you can play with your friends.
Yeah.
And Square have said as well that if this goes well, they're probably going to work on future games with similar concepts. I think what they mean is in relation to other Final Fantasy titles.
Okay, so
like they'll expand on stories of other games.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've had a bit of an eye on. I think I recall downloading the original beta or the demo of the game, and I think for some reason I think I encountered an error with it and it wouldn't open, and so I just never got around to playing it.
So they launched it as soon as the trailer was shown, and then it didn't. Then it actually didn't work for like a couple of days, and then they had to relaunch it.
Oh, okay, so that'll be So I would have downloaded it, and then it popped up an error, and then I would have got rid of it to save some space, and then never gone back to it.
Never got there.
But it's by Team Ninja, and they obviously have more recently done the Neo titles, which are really really good games. They are, I guess, referred to as Soulsborne games or games of that kind of similar ilk. But I would argue that in some places they're far more challenging. And obviously Team Ninja have a reputation with the Ninja Gaiden series of not being easy on the player. And so Neo was exactly the same case. So I'll be interested to see how moving into a franchise like Final Fantasy, Square are probably interested in keeping this game as approachable as possible for people who enjoy the Final Fantasy series.
They have explicitly said that if you want to play it and just enjoy the story, you will be able to.
Okay, well that's good. Yeah, that's good because Neo and obviously the Ninja Gaiden games, the difficulty is is not optional. You're playing those games, you're getting that kind of hardcore difficulty. So this is definitely one. I think this is one that I might have to kind of leave on my list for a bit, because we've got obviously Total War Warhammer 3 comes out, and I'm a big fan of the Total War series. That's dropping on Game Pass on the 22nd, I believe. And then we've got Elden Ring on the 25th. And obviously, actually, I think Warhammer might be the 18th. And then you've got Witch Queen on the 22nd.
Yes.
And then you've got Elden Ring on the 25th. And then Gran Turismo 7 on March the 4th. So I'll have to find some way to kind of slot these in. This is towards, I think, the middle to the end of March, so there's a possibility that I might be able to kind of get into it once some of those games are done and dusted. Although they're all games that I expect to be playing for months, so yeah, like I say, I'm going to wait and see how it's received. I'm sure it'll be good. Team Ninja have a reputation for producing really good games, so I'm not worried on that
Yeah.
front.
Yeah, I think it should. I'm hoping it'll scratch the Final Fantasy itch for anyone waiting for 16, which may well be several years off
I
at this point.
those
You don't
Yeah,
really know.
the trailers for 16 have me so excited, but who knows? Who knows when that game will come out? It's been, I think, did Final Fantasy 15 come out in 2015? I think it was maybe that long ago. I think it was
It came out when we lived together. It was that long ago.
that long
That's
ago.
that's where I played it. I remember, and I got it at launch.
So a while, yeah, so a
Yeah,
while. So it's going to be exciting to have a new mainline Final Fantasy game, but
definitely.
that's probably a while away. So yes, while that's in development, we can enjoy Stranger of Paradise to kind of get our Final Fantasy fix, and then Final Fantasy 14's not going anywhere. So
No,
lots to
they're
yeah, lots for the
they're adamant
franchise.
another 10 years at least on 14.
Oh really? Right.
That's what they
Well,
said. They're planning the next 10 years. Yeah,
okay. Is it going to get a graphics upgrade at some point? I think there was controversy over
it has had some
there was controversy over grapes. I
grapes.
recall.
Yeah, they have actually fixed the grapes.
They fixed the grapes now.
Yeah,
I
the
need to jump
grapes no
back
longer
into
look
that.
like a brick.
Yes, and we're
Um,
we're going to talk in an upcoming episode about the kind of state of MMOs as well, because there are plenty out there. We're going to talk a bit about the ones we've played, and also whether the gaming industry can handle any more, because so much of our time is currently sunk into them. So that's going to be an interesting topic for the future as well. With that being said, we'll move on to our next release, which is one that we've talked at length about. But this week, Bungie did reveal their Vidoc. So just before the release of any big expansion or kind of any big season release, they will release a Vidoc, normally between kind of 10 to 15 minutes, and this will cover. These are kind of interviews with the developers and also some trailers and kind of gameplay as well of the upcoming expansion or season. So they released the Vidoc this week for the Witch Queen, and it looked incredible. I mean, I speak for myself. Obviously, I mean, you're obviously a big fan, so I assume you felt the same based on the trailer.
yeah, this was, as we talked about earlier. Um, this was one of the things which really made me get excited and want to jump back in, play a lot of Destiny 2.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
just looks phenomenal, and I think a lot of it is, if they'd have gone this route, I think a lot of it is what we would have seen as Destiny 3.
Yes, yeah. Because it's clear the narrative elements have been in the works for a long time, even before Destiny 3 was canned as an official sequel. So we're seeing some of the fruits of kind of those narratives that were kind of set in stone early on, and obviously once they decided to keep Destiny 2 as the base game and expand upon it, and so the new content looks fantastic. New gameplay trailers, obviously from the Witch Queen. Visually, from an aesthetic point of view, it looks fantastic. New gameplay elements, gameplay loops as well look brilliant. There's going to be lots to take in. This is going to be kind of a big overhaul of the title while retaining the kind of core Destiny 2 gameplay systems. This is going to be the expansion on them that I think we've been looking for maybe since Forsaken. I think with Shadowkeep and Beyond Light, they were kind of smaller expansions in terms of what they added, whereas the Witch Queen is definitely their big vision for the next stage of the Destiny franchise. So alongside that, they announced the Void 3.0 rebuild, which is them tearing apart the current Void class and rebuilding it from the ground up to add in stasis, the stasis similar aspects and fragments, which came along with that class when it was introduced in Beyond Light. So that is going to be a big overhaul, and even me, as somebody who wouldn't normally play in the Void subclass, it looks like it's going to provide so much depth that it's going to give me an incentive to go in and try those out. But alongside the Void 3.0, they are currently in the process of doing the same for Solar and Arc. So those will drop at later stages, and at that point we're going to have a full new suite of reimagined classes, which is just furthering the kind of MMO image of the game, and how much granularity you're going to have with your builds, how much you're going to be able to customize them to how you want to play. So I'm really excited for that, and just can't wait. 10 days until the launch itself.
So soon.
I think a lot of time.
I think the other thing we didn't just touch on was, as well as the classes, they're quite largely overhauling a lot of the way weapons work.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
So I think the two biggest things are, one, that they're introducing crafting,
Yes, weapon
so you'll
crafting.
be able to unlock and then essentially select what perks, what magazine, what barrel, everything you have for your gun, and completely. I'm assuming they'll have a set amount to choose from for each weapon.
Yeah.
But it's gonna give a lot more. Instead of just grinding and hoping for a random drop of the roll you want, you'll be able to grind the currency to craft the roll you want. So
Yeah,
it's a bit more focused.
that I think is really important, because sometimes the grind can feel a bit disappointing if the outcome of the grind is not the gear you wanted. You didn't get the role you wanted, whereas now you're grinding for specific item or specific perk
Yeah.
to add
More and more
to the guns. Yeah.
focused grind as opposed to random ones
Yes. Yeah.
that's a
Exactly.
good thing. People know what they're investing their time in, then they're going to be happier to
To get it. Yeah.
have to do it. Yeah. And the
Absolutely.
other part of the weapons is they've introduced something called origin perks. Don't know if you
Yes.
caught that bit.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
did. Yeah.
So
based on each different kind of
on the
weapon
activity, yeah.
manufacturer. Yeah.
Oh well, there's actually, I think there's three kinds. So there's one's based on the manufacturers.
Oh yes. Yeah. Of course.
There's one's based on weapons that drop in certain activities. So like if you get
Yeah. The
an
gambit.
origin perk on a crucible weapon,
Yeah.
it's going to be something related to like being against other guardians or being the last person on your team, something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the other kind, there's seasonal weapons are also going to have origin perks. So season, what's it called? Of the Risen, the new season,
The
which
new
will be
season.
launching alongside Witch Queen. Because it's a Cabal themed season, they're going to have an origin perk called Land Tank.
Oh, okay.
And I've completely forgotten what it actually does, but it's but it's
But
something
it's
to do with, I don't know, something to do with that.
Yeah.
But it's specific to those weapons from that season. So
Yeah.
as far as I'm aware, that perk won't be replicated again after that.
And I think that didn't they mention that any returning weapons coming back into the fold, so if they're bringing any Destiny 1 weapons, then I believe they mentioned that they'd have an origin perk that
Yes,
was
that's
relevant
right.
to the original Destiny 1 weapon,
I
which
think
is
that's
really
right.
good.
I think all the returning weapons are actually going to be ones from the manufacturers. I think that's the idea.
Yes, yeah.
So I think that folds in with those ones.
Yeah, so that's going to be really good, and that again, I think, is in the past we've maybe seen new weapons come into Destiny, and I for one am big a big fan of the visual aesthetic appeal of a weapon, and I think
Yes.
in the past we've maybe seen new seasonal weapons have a lot of the same hallmarks as previous ones. So and with them coming back in, it's not really felt, I felt like, right, well, I'm just not going to go after that weapon because I might as well use whatever weapon it was originally based off if it's not been sunset. Whereas if there are origin perks around these reintroductions of weapons or ones that were originally sunset, then that's the incentive for me to go and get them because I can't get that perk anywhere else.
Yeah.
And as long as those perks are meaningful and have a significant impact on the gameplay of using that weapon, then yeah, I'm going to want to go after those. So I think that covers everything. We're going to have lots more to say as soon as it releases. Obviously, on the
Yes.
22nd, we've got the raid coming out. Then on the 5th of March. So there's going to be lots going on. We'll try and find something other than Destiny to slip in there as well. But I expect the next few weeks to kind of cover Witch Queen in detail, especially once we've got our hands on it. So lots more of that to come if Destiny is your thing. But also we'll cover any other big gaming news that manages to rear its head. In the meantime, I think that is everything for this week. It's been a really busy week. We've obviously had a lot of fun talking about it, and we're going to have a lot of fun playing a lot of these games coming out. It's going to be exciting few weeks ahead for us, and we hope, obviously, for everyone in the gaming industry. We'll see what happens with Ubisoft Quartz. We'll have to see how that goes. We will obviously have to see if the Resident Evil 4 remake gets announced and what that looks like. And also, we'll have to see if Lost Ark can hang on to its player base, see if it can continue to bring in the numbers that it's had on launch, or whether it will see a decline in the same way that New World did. We'll have to keep our eyes peeled for that. So, with that being said, that covers everything from us. And we're going to wrap one up for this week. Be sure to join us again next Tuesday at 7 p.m. GMT for another episode of the In Gaming Podcast. With all that said, my name is Hardiment, and it's goodbye from me.
Bye from me too.
Yes, goodbye. See you next week.